coming today. Thank you to those of you who are watching via live stream for this very, very important event. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you today. I want to thank the National Press Club for doing such a phenomenal job. To those of you at home who are watching or in offices, this is a combination of a virtual event, but also live. We have a small audience here of stakeholders and important partners, and the Press Club has done really a phenomenal job keeping us all safely distanced, and I'm grateful that we have this opportunity. So, in March of 2019, the President signed an executive order that has become known as PREVENTS. It stands for the President's Roadmap to Empower Veterans and End a National Tragedy of Suicide. This executive order was intentionally aspirational. The goal was to create an all-of-government and an all-of-nation effort to end suicide. A task force was formed, and we got to work both developing, and now we're in the phase where we're actually implementing the roadmap. A key part of that executive order, a key part of the roadmap is a national public health campaign. And that's what we are here today to launch. But before I tell you, we're going to keep the reveal for a little bit longer. Before we do that, we have some really incredible speakers who are here today to share their perspective. These are incredibly important influencers in our nation who will help us continue the work that we're doing to change the culture around mental health and suicide. It is my great pleasure to introduce Mrs. Karen Pence, the Second Lady of the United States. In January, as Second Lady, she has led initiatives to address military spouse employment issues and highlight the importance of art therapy for veterans dealing with post-traumatic stress. In January of this year, Mrs. Pence accepted the invitation to be the lead ambassador for PREVENTS. Because of her committed leadership, critical suicide prevention information and resources have reached more Americans as she has helped elevate suicide prevention to a national conversation. Her role as lead ambassador has also helped veterans and all Americans remember to check in with themselves and loved ones and to keep their mental health a priority. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, PREVENTS launched a public health awareness campaign called More Than Ever Before. Mrs. Pence has been a huge part of that effort, using her platform and promoting this campaign through her social media and her recent national park visits. There, she emphasized the many mental health benefits of being outdoors as communities began to reopen across the country. It is an honor to have Mrs. Pence here today. We appreciate her commitment to PREVENTS, our veterans, service members, and their families. Please join me in welcoming the Second Lady of the United States, Mrs. Karen Pence.
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you for everything that you do as well. I mean, you're just really making such a difference in this national campaign. To our distinguished guests, Secretary Robert Wilkie, Dr. Jerome Adams, Matthew Donovan, thank you for your leadership and the important role that you all have played to help address the mental and emotional health of our veterans and all Americans. It is such a pleasure to be here today with all of you as we launch this national public health campaign called REACH. As the lead ambassador of PREVENTS, I am honored to be a part of this effort to spread the message and to empower veterans and all Americans to play a critical role in preventing suicide. We are facing an epidemic of suicide. It is the 10th leading cause of death overall in our nation. And painful to believe, it is the second leading cause of death in 10 to 34-year-olds. And those who have defended our nation in uniform are 1.5 times more likely to die by suicide than Americans who never served in the military. And for women veterans, the risk factor is 2.2 times more. Our nation's veterans die by suicide at higher rates than the general population. In 2017 alone, 6,000 veterans took their lives. That averages out to about 20 veterans a day. And these experts in the room tell me that suicide is preventable. President Trump has committed this administration to addressing veteran suicide. He signed an executive order to create Prevents, which you just heard about, and the task force to develop a revolutionary roadmap to tackle the problem of veteran suicide. The President's executive order was created to improve access to suicide prevention resources for veterans and to develop a comprehensive national public health roadmap for preventing suicide among our nation's veterans, with the aspiration of ending veteran suicide once and for all. We recently released the Prevents Roadmap, and it includes 10 recommendations to ensure effective coordinated action among federal agencies and public organizations. That was one of the things that impressed me the most, is that all of these suicide experts are now all coming together, and we're all working together. And I believe that working together, we can implement this roadmap and end this national tragedy of suicide. It's time, though, to change the culture surrounding mental health and suicide. And what better time than now, when all of us have been facing mental health struggles. All of us have been facing anxieties and isolation. So now is the perfect time to tell people it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to talk about it. So what can we do? The best thing is to talk about it more, not less. We need to elevate the conversation about mental health and well-being and create an environment where people feel comfortable reaching out when they're vulnerable. No one should be afraid to ask for help. But that's going to take a huge culture change, because nobody wants to say they're vulnerable. But it's okay, because we all have felt this. But we also need to learn about the risk factors that all of us carry for suicide, to recognize them in ourselves and in our loved ones. By understanding these factors, we can reach out to them before a moment of crisis, and we can reach out when we ourselves are struggling. And then on the flip side, we also need to recognize our protective factors, like a sense of purpose, healthy family relationships, friends, and faith-based communities to support us, particularly in a time of need. We must strengthen protective factors of our nation's veterans, service members, and military families who have done so much for us. Earlier this year, I hosted a meeting at the Vice President's residence with members of the Prevents Task Force and other leading experts working on suicide and mental health initiatives and policies. And it was a very productive meeting, because I really felt like if I'm going to be the lead ambassador, I need to understand I am not the health expert, but I'm going to be telling what all of you are doing. And it was a fabulous meeting. I really learned a great deal about this serious mission that we all have. And the mission is to save lives. Every single one of us can help end this national, horrible tragedy. So far, we have 19 ambassadors, and they've all agreed to raise awareness about mental health and suicide prevention. And we expect to add even more ambassadors. But you can play a role too. We need all Americans engaged in preventing suicide. First, we need to come together as individuals and as families and as a nation to pay attention to our emotional well-being. You know, one thing that happened with COVID-19 is it slowed us all down. and we have the opportunity to take an assessment of our mental health. Check in with yourself every day. Know how you're doing, because if you're struggling, it's going to be hard for you to help others. Taking care of yourself will help you take care of others, and it will also tell you when you need to reach out for help. But 2, do what you know helps you. For me, art is important to my mental health. But find what works for you. Maybe it's gardening, or cooking, or meditating, or praying, or reading, or any other activity that engages you and your family in positive activities. But plan these into your day. I have a friend that just last night I gave her an assignment to draw something every day and to send me the picture. You have to schedule this every day. Hold yourself accountable to someone. I'm going to cook something every day. I'm going to take a walk, even if it's just around my apartment building, every day. Whatever you know helps you, schedule it into your day. And the third thing is that communication is key. So talk about your struggles, but don't forget to talk about your successes as well. Okay? There have been some real struggles during the last 3 or 4 months, painful times for all of us, but there have been some successes as well, and it's important to talk about both. 4 is talk to your kids and give them the emotional support they need. Tell them it's okay to say, I miss my teachers. I was going to be on the soccer team this year. I was going to go to prom this year. Be sure to talk to them about their struggles and their successes. And 5 is reach out to those that you know are struggling, vulnerable, and scared. You don't have to know all the answers. That's the key. You don't have to know all the answers. Sometimes just knowing someone is listening gets you through a hard time. That can help tremendously. And please reach out to military families in your area, many of whom might be missing a loved one who's deployed. So they might be doing all of this all by themselves. And 6, if you're worried about yourself or someone you love, please call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. And if you're a veteran, press 1. It's okay to ask for help. I encourage people to be open about talking about and addressing mental health in general, and suicide in particular. I just came from a summit at the White House on ways to get our schools open, because we're concerned about our kids as well right now. But it's okay to say that you're not okay. It's okay to ask for help. We live in challenging times, so more than ever before, open conversations about emotional well-being and mental health are as critical as our conversations about physical health. The Public Health Campaign website, www.wearewithinreach.net, provides information to help people recognize risk factors for suicide, including financial stress, chronic illness or pain, isolation, especially right now, and mental illness in themselves and their loved ones. And it also links to resources that can provide assistance in avoiding the hopelessness that can lead to suicide. The website also includes information on protective factors that might protect against suicide, such as belonging to a faith-based community, healthy family relationships, having a purpose in life, and strong problem-solving skills. REACH encourages people to strengthen the protective factors in their lives. I urge all Americans to be a part of this solution. I urge all Americans to help us take away the stigma related to mental health. Americans have a big heart for our nation's veterans, and it's our duty now to come alongside and help them get the help that they need. Because together we can make a difference. Together we can prevent suicide. Together we can accomplish our mission of saving lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Pence. Every time you speak, I am so, again, grateful that you have taken this on, and not just taken it on as something to help us with, but it is your investment and your passion for this is evident and so moving. So thank you for all that you're doing as our lead ambassador. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Honorable Secretary Robert Wilkie. Secretary Wilkie has made suicide prevention his top priority at the VA, and as the co-chair of the Prevents Task Force, he has been a strong advocate for the vision and the promise of Prevents for veterans and for all Americans. We would not have been able to develop or deliver the President's roadmap without his support. Secretary Wilkie was sworn in on July 30th, 2018 as the 10th Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Before his confirmation, Mr. Wilkie served as the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. Issues relating to the welfare of service members and veterans have always been very close to the Secretary's heart. As the son of an Army artillery commander, Mr. Wilkie spent his youth at Fort Bragg. Today, he continues to serve as a colonel in the United States Air Force Reserve, assigned to the Office of the Chief of Staff. Before joining the Air Force, Secretary Wilkie served in the United States Navy Reserve, and the Joint Forces Intelligence Command, Navy Special Warfare Group 2, and the Office of Naval Intelligence. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Wilkie.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you, Mrs. Pence, for bringing your attention and passion to this most important of issues. Barbara mentioned those magic words from my youth, Fort Bragg, and I'm going to keep returning to that time in my brief remarks. And, you know, growing up, the looming presence at Fort Bragg was General Matthew Ridgway. He had commanded the All-American Division to victory in North African Sicily, and he had planned the airborne assault on Hitler's fortress Europe. And one day he was sitting on his porch at Fort Myer when President Truman called and said, "It's time for you to go to Korea." He was sent to salvage what was left of the 8th Army on the Korean Peninsula. In fact, in his very first briefing, he asked the operations chief, "What is your plan of attack?" The operations chief said, "We don't have one." He was relieved on the spot. In his memoir about the Korean War, he explained how he was able to motivate troops who were in a bad way. He said that the fighting spirit of American soldiers is rooted in the individual sense of security, of belonging to a unit that will stand by him. He knew that men in combat were vulnerable to, as he said, that awful sense of aloneness that can sometimes overtake anyone in battle, the feeling that nobody gives a damn and that that man only has his own resources to depend on. That is what Mrs. Pence was talking about. Ridgway might as well have been talking about Americans today who are at risk of suicide because they feel they don't belong and they feel nobody cares. Back to my youth at Fort Bragg. My father, who'd recovered from grievous wounds, was a senior officer in America's most decorated combat unit, the 82nd Airborne Division, and yet he was not allowed to wear his uniform off post because the American people had rejected those who had borne the burden in Southeast Asia. So Ridgway's solution to that was, as Mrs. Pence said, to spend time with people, talk with them frequently, as he said, cultivating the assurance that they belong to a group that will return their loyalty no matter what danger threatens. And today, we are launching a public health campaign to end suicide in America that is based on the same idea that General Ridgway discovered in Korea. Early intervention helps, and connecting with people can give them a sense of belonging that keeps them in the fight. The effort that was made in Korea is now the effort we must make to help end veteran suicide. It is preventable. And thanks to this initiative, we are committed to working together to identify veterans and non-veterans who are at risk and direct them to a growing network of resources. Mrs. Pence pointed to the numbers. Back to my youth. In high school in southeastern North Carolina, the leading cause of death for my peers was automobile accidents. Today in southeastern North Carolina, the leading cause of death for junior high school and high school students is suicide. This is not a new issue for the military. In 1891, President Benjamin Harrison began to receive disturbing reports of death by suicide amongst officers and men in the frontier army. And he asked for reports from the War Department to inform him as to what was actually going on. That was 130 years ago. And since that time, we have seen steady numbers. They peaked right before World War II. They accelerated explodingly after Vietnam. And finally, we as a nation are finally getting around to address not just the last tragic act in a veteran's life, but those things that we have not had that national conversation about: mental health, addiction, and homelessness. 60% of the veterans who take their lives by suicide are not part of our VA family. The majority, we know, are from my father's era in Vietnam. As Mrs. Pence said, we now have the wisdom to see that the answer lies outside the walls of government. That's why we're working on every level with faith-based organizations, NGOs, companies and schools, and anyone else who can help provide resources to help their fellow citizens. As Mrs. Pence said, that's the purpose of REACH, the REACH campaign that we are launching here today, to remind everyone that they can make a difference by learning how to connect with those at risk and point them in the right direction. Nobody knows better than you all how to connect with family, your neighborhood, your workplace, your faith. And this campaign will give people more tools to have an impact. For the last year or so, as I mentioned, I have been calling for a national conversation about mental health so we can finally address this national tragedy of suicide. But President Trump actually started something bigger than that. The Prevents Initiative in this campaign is an attempt to change the culture of the country. Back to my youth. The notion that my father or any of his colleagues, his comrades who had fought in Southeast Asia, some of them actually had fought in Korea and in Vietnam, would discuss any apprehensions or anxieties that they had with any of their comrades was anathema to the ethos. In those times, those feelings were suppressed, and the human tragedy was incalculable. That's not how we should be as a society. It takes strength to talk to others, and that is in large part what this effort is about. No matter where you are in life, no matter what profession that you follow, it is talking. It is looking to higher power, and it is looking to your fellow man. We are much farther along because of what has happened in the last year than we have been in a long time, but we are not close to home. As we make progress, I hope we can all remember that our veterans are leading the way. In 1864, when President Lincoln was thanking a military regiment from New York for supporting his government, he told them that veterans would have a voice in his administration. He said, "To you, who render the hardest work, and its support should be given the greatest credit." For so many years, it was veterans who bore the brunt of the tragedy of suicide. And we should thank them once again and give them the greatest credit for the lessons we've learned. And I will close again with General Ridgway. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1986 by Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan said that great men step forward when they are needed. Heroes come when courage seems in short supply. This effort is about great American men and women and heroes who step forward when the country has asked them to do things that many of their fellow citizens would not. And this is a service that we owe to them, we owe to their families, and we owe to our nation. So Mrs. Pence, I thank you for everything that you've done. Barbara, for leading this effort. Our Deputy Colonel Pamela Powers, my friends, Matt Donovan and Elise Van Winkle, as well as the Surgeon General, for taking this on and setting a new course for those who bear freedom on their shoulders, and a new course for the country. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Secretary Wilkie, for your support and passion and leadership in the last year. It's been personally incredibly important to me in this work. I know I have many, many friends and allies to do this important job. The Department of Defense is a critical member of the Prevents Task Force. DoD subject matter experts provided important input across key areas in the development of the roadmap. We are pleased to partner with DoD as we implement the Prevents Public Health campaign. DoD has long focused on suicide prevention by engaging and educating service members and their families about these critical efforts. It's my honor to introduce Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness of the Department of Defense, Matthew Donovan. Confirmed by the United States Senate in March 2020, Mr. Donovan provides policy, guidance, and oversight for the readiness, management, and health care of the Department's 4.5 million total force service members, retirees, their families, and the civilian workforce. He is the Principal Staff Assistant and Advisor to the Secretary of Defense for Force Readiness, Force Management, Health Affairs, National Guard and Reserve Component Affairs, Education and Training, and Military and Civilian Personnel Requirements and Management. It's clear why working with you, sir, and the Department of Defense is critical if we are to succeed with Prevents. Thank you. Please welcome Secretary Donovan.
Well, thank you, Dr. Van Dahlen. It's a real honor to be here, and good afternoon, folks. On behalf of our Secretary of Defense, Dr. Mark Esper, it's an honor to be here with all of you for this worthy cause. Mrs. Pence, thank you so much for your strong support of our military spouses and families. It really means a lot to us. And also, along with the other members of the task force, your advocacy and leadership in this very important issue that the Prevents Task Force has taken on. And all who are working tirelessly to help prevent this national tragedy of suicide. Thank you, Secretary Wilkie, not only for your dedicated leadership at Veterans Affairs and as a co-chair of this task force, but also as a former Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. You have large shoes that I'm still trying to fill, so thank you for that. I also thank Secretary Esper for his stalwart support for military families and his dedication to addressing suicide in our military community. Finally, we would not be united in this effort today if it weren't for the leadership and commitment of President Trump. Suicide prevention is a top priority for the Department of Defense, as we have the moral responsibility, as Secretary Wilkie mentioned, to care for the millions of active Guard and Reserve service members, their families, as well as the millions of veterans who have served our nation so well. The loss of life by suicide is devastating, and each one has a deeply personal story. With each occurrence, there are families, often with children, who are left with shattered lives. And in our close-knit military, we know the impact of these devastating losses is felt sharply within our units and within our commands, and often accompanied by heartfelt questions such as, what did I miss? How could I have helped to prevent this? We are proud to partner with Prevents and have a long history of collaborative efforts to end suicide. Through this partnership and the DoD lead, our own Dr. Elise Van Winkle, we have taken an all-hands-on-deck approach that reaches beyond the federal government and into our public and private sector partners. We strive for every American to have the knowledge and the tools they need to prevent suicide. Today's launch of the REACH campaign perfectly demonstrates the innovative thinking behind the Prevents Roadmap. At DoD, we've already begun planning for how the roadmap will expand our current collaboration to ensure a seamlessly military to civilian transition, which begins a year before separation and then continues for the year following. We are creating an overarching transition framework to align all of the components of that transition and provide service members who are leaving the military with an understanding of and easy access to all the benefits and resources they're entitled to following their military service. This effort is central in helping us identify and address gaps so we can advance mental health care, financial readiness tools, and other protective factors in support of service members as they prepare to re-enter civilian life. While we are making important strides in military to civilian transition, the REACH campaign aims to do even more. Through this campaign, we will change our national conversation about suicide and create an environment in which people reach out to their loved ones and friends who may be vulnerable or at risk. We will also strive to empower service members, veterans, and all Americans to have those necessary discussions without fear or stigma, so all of us can help one another, particularly those who are struggling, to reach out, know that they're not alone, and get the support and care that they need. Our military community is perfectly suited for this effort. Camaraderie, trust, and teamwork are ingrained in the value and ethos of the military culture. From day one, our servicemen and women begin building the bonds that last far beyond their military service. Our service members understand that they must look out for one another on the battlefield, in the barracks, and at home, where the shared experience of military service unites all. We need to harness that special connection and the promise it holds to impact not only our military and veteran populations, but in our neighborhoods, towns, and cities all across America. Our collective efforts for our fellow Americans who reach those darkest moments, they must know that hope is not lost and that every American can play a role in this fight to prevent suicide. It's an honor and a sacred responsibility to care for those who defend and have defended our nation. Our commitment in this effort extends from the debt of gratitude we owe our service members and their families. We have an obligation to ensure they are equipped to lead healthy lives and to empower everyone with the knowledge, tools, and resources that are truly within their reach. I look forward to continuing this important work together. Thank you all for your unwavering dedication and support for our service members and their families who proudly support, defend, and protect our great nation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And thank you again for the partnership. It's a critical one as we move this initiative forward. Vice Admiral Jerome Adams is the 20th Surgeon General of the United States. His mission as the nation's doctor is to advance the health of the American people. And his motto is better health through partnerships. And I'm here to say that's exactly how he acts every single day. He is committed to forging new partnerships and strengthening existing relationships with members from the business, faith, education, and public safety and national security communities. As the Surgeon General, Dr. Adams holds the rank of Vice Admiral in the U.S. Public Health Service, Commissioned Corps. In this capacity, he oversees the operations of more than 6,000 uniformed health officers who serve in nearly 800 locations around the world, promoting, protecting, and advancing the health and safety of our nation. We are honored and thrilled that Dr. Adams has joined Mrs. Pence as one of our ambassadors. Anyone who follows our Surgeon General knows that he is extremely active and effective on social media. We have already benefited from this as he has posted several videos in support of Prevents over the last several months. Please join me in welcoming our Surgeon General.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Oh, you all can do better than that. Good afternoon, everyone. You know, it's really an honor to be here, and thank you so much for that kind introduction and for your work on the task force. Got to be honest with you all, I'm a little bit nervous. This is my first conversation with a live audience since February. And I can't think of an occasion that would be more fitting than for the launch of our REACH campaign. I remember when this idea was first being formulated. And you and I, we talked on the phone, and one of the challenges is, it's easy, quite frankly, for any president to say, let's put together a blue ribbon panel. Let's issue a proclamation. Let's do something that makes it look like we're doing something. But it takes people to really make that become a living, breathing, actionable initiative. And you have just really impressed the heck out of me with how you've taken this and run with it and pulled together partners from not just government, but from the public sector and just all over to make this something that I know will actually save lives. So can we get a round of applause for Barbara, please? And I want to thank Second Lady Pence. She's one of my buddies. And I say that very honestly. I would not be here if it weren't for her. She put in a good word with me to someone who you all may know. And I just really appreciate how she's supported not just the military, but also health. And that intersection is what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm honored that we have people here from the health and the military and veteran communities. I just also want to say thank you to the people who took the time to come from out of town to be here today at a moment when, quite frankly, travel is a little bit scary. Thank you to the Press Club for making it as safe as possible for us to be out. And again, even though we're in the midst of a pandemic of COVID, we are facing a pandemic of suicide. Scary to me as a father, as a leader of a uniformed service. I'm the one who has to call the families when one of our officers dies. And I'll tell you, I've made as many calls to families who have a loved one who's died of suicide as I have for any other reason over the 3 years that I've been Surgeon General of the United States. That's a call that I don't want to have to make when you look at the fact that many of these deaths, all of these deaths, if you get to the root cause, are preventable. In 2017, suicide ranked as the 10th leading cause of death, one of the leading causes that's contributing to our decreasing life expectancy for Americans. I stand before you as a father of a 16, a 14, and a 10-year-old, and also as a representative of the first generation in 50 years who can't look their kids in the eye and say, you're going to live a longer life than what I will live as your parent. And one of the reasons for that is the fact that our suicide rates are going in the wrong direction. An American life is lost by suicide every 11 minutes. The latest data totaling over 47,000 people, which is an increase of 33% since 1999. And I worry that in the midst of COVID, we're going to see those numbers go up. I don't want to be the Debbie Downer here, but we've got to be prepared for that. And this couldn't be happening at a better time because we need a counterforce to what we know is a wave of mental health issues that we're facing in the midst of COVID. We know that for every 1% increase in unemployment, you see a 1.3% increase in suicides. We know that we are going to have an uphill battle, but we're ready for it with the REACH campaign that's being launched today. And I mentioned 11 minutes. 11 minutes should sound familiar to you all. I've spent a lot of my tenure as Surgeon General informing the public that a person dies of an opioid overdose every 11 minutes. So suicide in America is now on par with opioid overdoses in America, the epidemic we were dealing with long before we knew about this thing called COVID-19. We've made significant strides in raising public awareness around addiction in our nation's opioid crisis, and now we must commit to making significant strides in coordinated efforts to address rising suicide rates in America and beyond. And it's important to note that there is no single cause of suicide, which is why your job is so incredibly hard, because we're trying to figure out all the different reasons and predictors and risk factors and resiliency factors. Suicide deaths reflect a complex interaction of risk and the loss of the protective factors that we now know exist out there at the individual, community, and societal levels. And sadly, again, it's an issue that's affecting our veterans at alarming rates. As your U.S. Surgeon General, I want to be absolutely clear. My team and I are all in on suicide prevention, and we're committed to working alongside both public and private partners to lower the number of lives lost. And we're starting with veterans because we know that that's where the problem is greatest. We're starting with veterans because we have great leaders like Secretary Wilkie, and we recognize that we can really align efforts in a way that we may not be able to if we just tried to wrap our arms around the great big problem that exists out there. And I really hope that we can use this and then expand it to a much wider level across society. I'm honored to be a Prevents Ambassador and working alongside many of you all. And, you know, we've got 19 Prevents Ambassadors named, but all of you all are Prevents Ambassadors. Can I do that? Can I do that? Everyone is a Prevents Ambassador, and I want you to think of it in that manner. I want you to put out your own videos about what you're doing to promote your mental health. I want all of you who have social media channels to send out the numbers and the hotlines and the websites that we're going to be talking about today. I want all of you all to help us talk about the REACH campaign, the goal of which is to change the conversation about suicide and create an environment where people reach out to loved ones, friends, and other ones who may be vulnerable, and urge those who may be struggling to reach out to others. Because no one should be afraid to reach out. No one should be afraid to seek help. We know this can't be accomplished unless we address that ugly S word, stigma. I get asked as Surgeon General all the time in interviews, what's our biggest killer? Is it cigarettes? Is it soda? Is it opioids? Is it COVID-19? The answer that I give people is that I think our biggest killer is stigma. Stigma keeps people in the shadows. Stigma keeps people from asking for help. Stigma keeps some of us as health officials from offering help because we judge people. We say, you need to toughen up. You need to do this on your own. And the fact is, unless our loved ones and families feel comfortable seeking help, and unless more people feel comfortable offering help without judgment, we'll never reach those who need it the most, and we'll never turn around our suicide rates, or our substance use disorder rates, or our obesity rates, or our rates from any array of other diseases that suffer from stigma. Right? Suicide's not just a mental health problem either. It's also a public health problem. Data from the National Violent Death Reporting System show that 54% of suicides in this country are not in response to a mental health condition. So these two are linked, but we've got to be careful again in thinking that there is one single cause, one single solution. Like has been done with opioids, cancer, heart disease, and obesity, we need to expand the national narrative to include the environmental factors in addition to the individual factors. Because again, we can be terribly stigmatizing to people when we say it's all on you to pick up that phone and call. It's all on you to recognize that you have a problem. It's all on you to have the courage to speak out to a friend. We need to realize, yes, there is some degree of empowering people to reach out and to act on their own behalf, but there's a much larger degree of creating the environment where people feel comfortable doing so. We need to give everyone an understanding of how they can play a role, whether in schools, workplaces, faith communities, healthcare, and in any other setting. And the Secretary said this. You know, we recognize one of the challenges is that the military was a support system for our veterans for decades, in many cases. Then we pull that rug out from underneath of them. We need to figure out how we provide that support system, and it's there in the communities. It's in the churches. It's in the schools. It's coaching a sports team. It's there. We just need to make those connections. The campaign website, www.wearewithinreach.net, provides information to help people recognize the risk factors for suicide, including financial stress, chronic illness or pain, isolation and mental illness in themselves and in their loved ones. And again, all these risk factors are only going up with COVID-19, so we must make sure the resiliency factors go up even more so. The website links to resources that can provide assistance in addressing hopelessness that can lead to suicide. If we all step into this challenge, we will limit emotional suffering, save lives, and lay the foundation for a mentally healthier nation going forward. And, you know, my folks really wanted me to talk a whole lot about COVID-19 while we're here. I'm going to keep it simple. Wear a mask. That's all. That's my PSA for today. That's the number one thing we can do to prevent the spread of COVID-19. It's not an impingement on your freedom. It actually increases your freedom and your choices because it lowers the spread of disease, increases the chances that we will be able to open and stay open, and it actually will decrease that hopelessness. It will actually lower suicide rates. This thing is a powerful, powerful tool. It can open churches. It can open schools. It can open restaurants. It can lower suicide rates. But you know what? It only does that if we actually use them, if we actually wear them. The other important point I wanted to make about the intersection between COVID and suicide is that social distancing does not have to be synonymous with disconnection or disengagement. We need to find ways to stay connected and to help others stay connected with family, friends, and loved ones by taking advantage of technology, talking, texting, typing. My kids hate me for this. You'll like this as a former teacher. I make them sit down and write out good old-fashioned letters to their grandma and to their grandpa. But just figuring out how we can stay connected even as we are social distancing. I want to finish by saying that if we focus daily on caring for our own emotional well-being and supporting the well-being of those we love, I know we can successfully mitigate the mental health effects of COVID-19. One of the things that Dr. Van Dahlen and the task force has been looking at is the research out there around suicide prevention and resiliency. And there's good news. It's easy to talk about the bad numbers. It's important that we lay the groundwork. But there's a lot of good news. The good news is there's evidence out there about how we can lower suicide rates. We can successfully do this, and that's what the REACH campaign is all about. Although at a difficult time, an unprecedented time in our nation's history, I still remain steadfast in encouraging Americans to use healthy mechanisms to cope and to band together to practice the tried and true habits that will keep us safe and healthy in mind, in body, and in spirit. If we all step up to this challenge, I know we can, we will. The fact is we must limit emotional suffering, save lives, and lay the foundation for a mentally healthier nation going forward. And please, and here's where you can take out your phones, if you or a loved one are in a mental health crisis or could use some support, call SAMHSA's national helpline at 1-800-662-HELP. Put it in your phones, tweet it out, put it on your Instagram. If you like TikTok like my kids, do a little dance and send it out. Whatever we can do to get the message out. 1-800-662-HELP. Your text, your tweet could save a life. And again, the suicide hotline, 1-800-273-8255. And if you're a veteran, press 1. These are available 24/7, 365, and the calls are free and confidential. And with that, again, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to address you today. Thank you for asking me to be a part of this very important initiative because, yes, it's about veteran suicide, but it's about so much more. It's about resilience. It's about looking at the risk factors that lead to suicide. And if we really lean into this, if we really dig deep, if we really try to get upstream, we won't just lower suicide rates. We'll lower COVID deaths. We'll lower cancer rates. We'll lower obesity rates. We'll lower diabetes. We'll lower hypertension. And I know that you all don't believe me when I'm saying this, but if we get upstream, the risk factors actually are all the same. All these different problems, the further upstream you get, come from a common place, a common source. And that's what we need to realize with the REACH campaign. If we can connect people, then we can lower disease, we can improve public health, and we can create a healthier and a safer nation for everyone, especially and including our veterans. So thank you, and I look forward to continued collaborations to address this crisis.
Well, hopefully you all, I'm going to put this over here because I'm going to walk and talk now. Hopefully you all feel inspired by those four set of remarks. Thank you, Surgeon General, and thank you to all of our speakers for sharing your perspective, your wisdom, your passion. I'm going to walk and talk because that's what I actually prefer. I don't like standing behind the podium. So here we were a year ago, and the task was create a roadmap that would empower our veterans and end a national tragedy of suicide. As you've heard, this is a very big task. But as you've also heard, there was all kinds of reasons to be optimistic, to be hopeful. So we started to set about our task. One of the things that we had to respond to early on was, why public health? Why is this effort focused on public health? Shouldn't we just go out and find all the veterans who are suicidal and bring them in and get them the care that they need? Well, if that would have been possible, they wouldn't have the president wouldn't have needed to create the executive order or bring in a task force or bring me from the work that I was doing in the nonprofit space. So the reason why public health is so critical is because public health gives us a wonderful model. The focus is on a universal approach. That's why as we talk about the work we're doing through Prevent, and today what we'll show you, which is this amazing campaign called REACH, the focus of the REACH campaign is for everyone. Because not just, there's several reasons. For one, our veterans, as we've been hearing all morning, or all afternoon, sorry, are not the only ones that we are concerned about. In addition, our veterans are in all of our communities. They're at our workplaces. They're in our schools. They're in our neighborhoods. And in order to prevent suicide for our veterans, we have to take suicide on nationally. There is no other way. And so the public health model gives us that broad-based opportunity to focus on the universal, everyone. But then we also intentionally focus on those who are at greater risk. The Surgeon General mentioned this overlap, the work that his office does, the work that Prevents does, the work that many of us do. That overlap. What are the factors that put people at risk? You and I may have very similar life experiences, and I may be at greater risk for suicide because of a number of things that happened to me. You may be, because of some things that happened to you uniquely or that affected you uniquely, may end up having more of a risk for substance use or opioid addiction. So we need to selectively look at those risk categories and bring more information and dive deep into those communities, those populations. And then when we're talking about suicide, we're going to be very, very focused on the smallest group of individuals that we know are at greatest risk because they've already had a suicide attempt. They are in the very, very, very high risk categories that show us that they are more likely to die by suicide. So that public health approach. So today, the piece that you're going to see, the REACH campaign, is the universal piece. But once it's out there, it allows us to then drive into selective communities and to get very, very focused on those who are most at risk. So that's why the public health. The other big question that we had that came to us was, why not just veterans? Why is this an all of nation, all of government? I mentioned that, if we could have found all the veterans who were suicidal or who were struggling and asked them to come in for help, the Secretary would have done that. And so many of the people who are our partners are working to do just that, identifying veterans, doing outreach into communities. But we need to do more. We need to engage our employers. We need to engage our academic institutions, our nonprofits, to find and bring the messaging to our veterans everywhere. But there's another reason. My dad was a veteran. He served in World War II. He lied about his age to join the Navy right after Pearl Harbor. He came home and he had post-traumatic stress, though we would not have known to call it that then. They didn't talk about it. But now looking back, I know that that's what was happening. He was an amazing man who took care of me and my 3 older brothers. My mom had a psychotic break right after I was born. And so here my dad was in rural California with 3 little boys, a baby girl, and a psychotic wife in rural California in 1959. My dad did what veterans do. He took care of us. He served. My dad served in his community in different ways until he died. That's what our veterans do. When we equip them, when we give them a mission, when we give them the opportunity, they will serve, they will lead. So as you've heard from all of our speakers this morning, this afternoon, something must be going on with my clock, sorry. As you've heard, our veterans will lead the way to change the conversation about suicide in our country. And while we're at it, save lives and heal families. The other thing I want to point out that you've heard, one size doesn't fit all. Again, back to public health. That's why we look at what are the factors, what are the opportunities. We partner with everyone we can partner with, whether it's art or whether it's recreation. All kinds of things can be those tools that help people deal with the trauma and the pain that they're experiencing. So we were working on the roadmap. We were working on the public health campaign. We knew we had to have a national conversation. That's what today is a continuation of, because actually we've been doing this now for several months. I'm going to talk about that in a second. We knew that we needed to educate Americans about risk factors. We all have risk factors for all variety of things. I know that I'm at risk for heart disease. Why? Because my dad died of heart disease. Both of my brothers have already developed heart disease. So I know I'm at high risk, so I do something about it. I watch my weight, I exercise, I eat well, I try to get enough rest as often as possible. I take care of myself. How can we, as Americans, how can we possibly protect ourselves from something that could kill us if we don't even know we're at risk? So we have to educate our nation, our veterans, our service members about risk factors. We have to educate all of us about protective factors so that we know what things to strengthen. I love what Mrs. Pence was saying about it has to be intentional. It's good to walk, to run, to swim, to read, to garden. All those things are great. But you probably will all agree that you can also do all those things in a way that you're not really focused on your emotional health and well-being. I remember at times being very stressed, and I had a really intense run. I don't think it was necessarily that good for my mental health because I was fixated on whatever the stress was. So intentionality, encourage people to think about themselves and the work that they're doing, to take care of themselves. We know that we have to educate people about the myths associated with suicide. They're barriers. They prevent people from reaching to each other or from reaching out. A couple of common myths that still exist, that have been here certainly for as long as I can remember hearing people talk about suicide. One is that if you ask someone if they're thinking about hurting themselves, you could actually put that idea in their head. Guess what? No, that's not going to happen. Someone is not going to decide to die by suicide because I ask them, how are you doing, and are you worried that you're going to hurt yourself? That's not going to happen. Another myth, if someone wants to die by suicide, there's nothing you can do to stop them. I remember hearing that many times growing up. When my dad would read the paper or something would be on the news, people would kind of like shake their heads. That's not true either. We know that if we intervene, that most people will not then go on to die by suicide. So these myths are barriers that we have to remove. So we were working on the public health campaign that you're going to see the concept and some of the images and a really great partnership tool that we have to share today. And then the pandemic hit. So here we were, full speed, focused on getting the roadmap out, and the world changed. And so we all reorganized like all of you did, like everyone who's watching did, began working in a new and different way. But our office became very concerned about the other danger to Americans as a result of COVID, the mental health concerns. What would happen to our nation if we didn't address the mental health concerns that would absolutely, understandably, be the result, be one potential result of COVID. And what happens is, for those of you who don't live and breathe this all the time, those people who were already at risk, it pushed them further into despair. And those people who were sort of hanging on and doing okay and functioning because they had a job and they were able to go to church where they got support, their health was decent, it pushed them into those high-risk categories. So, I'm going to show you, because this is actually, it's not the beginning of REACH, it's more a prequel. All right, we were working on the REACH campaign and then COVID hit, and so we launched what we've affectionately referred to as a mini campaign. And this is where we first started to work very closely with the Second Lady and Dr. Adams and several other of our ambassadors. So I think if I click, does this give me yes? Okay. So these slides tell the story of a little campaign that we launched called More Than Ever Before. COVID-19 pandemic, the mental health consequences. Americans around the country were dealing with the understandable consequences, the reactions that came because of COVID. And so we knew that we had to create some messaging to help Americans understand it's time to pay attention to your emotional health and well-being. And so we launched More Than Ever Before. Some of you may have seen that, that phrase connected to our campaign, More Than Ever Before. The message was very simple but very clear. More than ever before, we must take care of our emotional well-being and the well-being of those we love, and we must reach to those who are most vulnerable. This was a very simple message that we started to push out, that the Second Lady did a beautiful video for us. Surgeon General did videos. Chairman Mason, who's with us today, another one of our ambassadors, has done a video that you'll see this week about this important issue. Why? Because it can be that simple. You, by reaching out, or you, by reaching to someone, can actually stop the deterioration. If somebody gets help early, that's what we want. We want to intervene early. We want to back this way, way, way up. So we launched More Than Ever Before, and there were 6 key features that we shared that we wanted people to pay attention to. And the Second Lady did a beautiful job of sharing these in her comments. We wanted to make sure that people checked in with themselves every day. Get to know how you are doing emotionally. We all go running through life, doing our work, and unless we intentionally tune in, how am I doing today? Most of us wouldn't know if I asked someone randomly unless you practice. It is a practice to pay attention. We also wanted to encourage people, do what works for you. There are so many things that are good for your emotional health and well-being. Find out and practice them every day. Pay attention to that. Share your struggles and what works for you. Being vulnerable is a strength. Being vulnerable brings people to you. Being vulnerable allows you to reach people who are struggling. And guess what? When you reach people who are hurting and you help them, it helps you. It's a twofer. So making sure that we encourage people to reach out to those and share what works and also their struggles. Talk to your kids. I'm a child psychologist. Talk to your kids. They need us to talk to them about these challenging topics. They're afraid. They don't understand. They suffer too. Talk to them and tell them what works or what used to work for you. And please reach to those who are most vulnerable. All we each have to do is think about, in our own network, in our own community, I have people that I regularly check in on because I know this is a harder time for them maybe, or they always are having a harder time. Doesn't mean they're not functioning in their life, but I look out for them. I hope that if I need that, people are looking out for me. And finally, we really pushed the Suicide Prevention Lifeline to make sure that people had the resources. And there were tons of other resources, as you've heard, on our website. So that was the More Than Ever Before campaign. And I made a commitment on the day that we launched it, March 27th. I don't know what took over, I don't know, but I said, okay, I'm going to do a video a day. a video a day. Hey. So my husband, who's here today, served as the videographer. And I think I've done like something now, 85 or 90 little clips, little short, just talking about anxiety or depression or the holidays, how we were dealing those. And then, there we go, whoops. Then Mrs. Pence did videos, and the Surgeon General did videos, and Marianne Watson, retired Brigadier General Marianne Watson did videos. She's another one of our ambassadors. DJ Nash, the creator of A Million Little Things, another ambassador, did videos. Dr. Elise Van Winkle, who's with us today, you'll hear her in a few minutes, did videos. And also CEO Mike Linnington from the Wounded Warrior Project, and many, many others. All of these folks joined us in this effort to help people understand that more than ever before, we have to pay attention to our emotional health and well-being. So we did that for 3 months while we're working on everything else. And then it was time to launch REACH. And when we thought about the more than ever before, and the same designer who created REACH with us, created the little More Than Ever Before campaign, and we now see how beautifully they fit together. So as we go forward, we're going to continue to remind people to do all those things broadly. And we're also now, today, launching a very important component of the roadmap, the REACH campaign. So you're going to see some of the images now and some of the language that is set to, the slide set is set to some very simple music. I think you'll be moved. And then I'm going to show you a tool that some of our partners have created to go with this campaign. So this is REACH. So that is what REACH looks like. And I want to now give a shout out to the gentleman who is the creative genius behind the images, Joffrey Frankel, who is a designer, but he comes to this work because of his passion for this. He served in the Gulf War, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, as a combat medic. And when we had the opportunity to work together, we couldn't think of a better person who understood this challenge. So this is the beginning of a national conversation, and these are the images that you will now see. But we won't be successful if we don't partner with all variety of agencies and organizations. And so as we were building this, one of our partner organizations, PenFed and the PenFed Foundation, stepped up and said, well, how can we help? And we said, well, we're launching this public health campaign, and we're going to need tools, and we're going to need videos to get started as we start to push this out into using different platforms. Soon, tomorrow, you'll see these ads that you're seeing here will take over in many of the digital places that you generally go to. You'll see us. And in a few weeks, we'll take over things like some of the video streaming with some of these tools. So the PenFed Foundation said, well, we want to help. And they partnered with the Soldier Strong nonprofit organization, and they created a video that I'm going to show you now that is the first tool, the first video that is going to become part of the collection of REACH. Play the video.
Wanted the thoughts to stop, the memories to stop, the nightmares to stop.
Right now in our country, too many of our friends, families, and neighbors are suffering and are at risk for suicide. This is especially true for the extraordinary men and women who choose to serve our country.
One night, I just was like, I can't take this anymore.
I felt it was the only way out.
I think I not only attempted it once, I probably attempted it like multiple times.
132 Americans a day are losing their lives to suicide. And each suicide is not only an individual tragedy, it also brings severe suffering to the many people attached to the individual who dies. Suicide is a national crisis that touches all of us. First responders, farmers, university students, LGBTQ+, all are confronting high rates of suicide. The COVID-19 crisis is only making a bad situation worse. But this need not be the case. Suicide is preventable.
I didn't want to end it all. I just wanted to end the pain. It was more of a cry for help.
Somebody might look normal, might be normal, but the next thing you know, they're gone because nobody asked them, are you okay? Are you having a bad day? Are you, do you need to talk?
As a nation, we must reach out to those who are suffering. Just the act of reaching out to those in need can help save lives.
What you're going through now isn't always going to be.
Approach somebody about this.
Talk to someone. It doesn't have to be a therapist. It doesn't have to be a doctor. It can just be a friend. You need help. Reach out and get it.
We are all within reach. Reach out to someone you know today. And if you are hurting, please reach for help.
Just reach out.
So again, I want to thank PenFed and PenFed Foundation and Soldier Strong for allowing us to have this very powerful video that will start appearing as far and wide as we can push it. And for any of the folks who are watching who are part of an organization that may want to join us, please reach out to us and become part of this. And for those individuals who are watching this, go to our website, which launched today, wearewithinreach.net, and take the pledge. Become part of the solution. It's a very simple pledge to take. It allows you to be part of this national conversation. So now I'm going to invite three very special guests up to the stage for a little bit of a conversation as we close today out, because we need to hear as much as we can different perspectives that help us understand the work that we're doing. And I can't think of, come on up, you guys, come on up, three better people to help close this important launch today. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about them while they're demasking. Hey, I recognize you guys. So these are our three amazing individuals. They're also three very dear friends, and I greatly appreciate their willingness to be with me today and to talk a little bit about them. I'm going to ask them some questions so that we can understand how they see this campaign fitting into the work that they're doing. So Dr. Elise Van Winkle currently serves as the Executive Director of the Office of Force Resiliency for the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, who her boss is here, so she has to do really well today. In this role, Dr. Van Winkle is the Principal Staff Advisor to the Undersecretary and the Secretary of Defense for developing policies, providing oversight, and integrating activities in the areas of sexual assault prevention and response, suicide prevention, harassment, including hazing and bullying, diversity management, equal opportunity, drug demand reduction, and the department's collaborative efforts with the Departments of Veterans Affairs. And I thought I had a lot going on. So thank you, Elise, for being with us. Absolutely. Dr. Andy Keller is President, Chief Executive Officer, and the Linda Perryman Evans Presidential Chair of the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, a Texas-based nonprofit that provides nonpartisan policy and program research, development, and advice to state and local leaders towards a single goal, improving mental health care delivery in Texas. Andy's a licensed psychologist with more than 20 years of experience in behavioral health policy, financing, and best practices. His work is centered on helping state and local health systems implement evidence-based and innovative care, as well as helping local and state governments develop the regulatory and financial frameworks to support them. So Andy is here representing our non-governmental partnerships, and Andy came in from Texas to be with us, always comes, he always answers the call, so thank you, Andy. And finally, Dr. Matt Miller is the Director of Suicide Prevention, Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention at the Department of Veterans Affairs. A veteran himself, Dr. Miller previously served as Director of the Veterans Crisis Line, where he led the expansion and successful growth of the crisis line, including the creation of a third call center and increased total staffing to 900 plus full-time employees. Under his leadership, the VCL has become the world's largest crisis call center, ensuring top quality care for veterans and their families. And Matt, too, has been a tremendous help to me as I have learned my way around the federal government. So thank you, Matt, for joining. So I want to start, and I'm just going to ask a question, and we all know well, I know all of you, so just whoever wants to answer, but I'd like to hear from you. Just if you would, share why this work is important to you and why you've chosen to devote your career to this work. And Elise, we'll start here, and the gentleman
Sure.
can follow.
I think if I think about it, it all seemed very arbitrary of how I got to where I am, although it was probably much more predestined than I would give myself credit for. That, and we've had these conversations. I think, I was born very empathetic. Everything seemed to be a huge violation. If I stepped on an ant, that would throw me off for a day. I mean, it was just, I felt everything. I also grew up in an environment where that didn't necessarily fit in. And so I remember feeling that emotions were really confusing for me. Despite my parents' attempts to try to assist me with that, it just felt very heavy. And so I found myself very attracted to fields where I could help, where I could hear from people, where I could try to find places that I could help others, animals, people, wherever I ended up. And I ended up on a course of working in trauma, starting with Boston Area Rape Crisis Center, domestic violence work outside of Baltimore, and then doing extensive work on a trauma team in the District of Columbia here in DC. And in doing that work, you become a person who is hearing about traumas that have been perpetrated. You become the person for some people who it was the first time they've ever spoken about these things. And you're giving people a voice who really didn't have one before. It felt very confining in the sense that I wanted others to understand what was happening. But one of the things that I remember being told many, many times is that my job was a conversation killer. That, it didn't go well in cocktail conversation when you talking about what you do for a living and, how your day was. And it's, I didn't get a data set I needed. I didn't get, a paper written. And I'm thinking I got stabbed by a pencil trying to break up a fight. It just didn't fit into the conversation. And in that process, I learned that these topic areas, suicide being one of them, people don't want to talk about them. And it creates very much an environment of us versus them. And if they can keep it at arm's length, whether it's sexual assault, whether it's suicide, drug addiction, all of these things, very, very interrelated. If people can keep it at an arm's length, then it won't affect them. It won't happen to them. It won't happen to the people that they love. And what we know is that's simply not the case. And what will protect you the most is having these conversations. And so in that sense, I started to really try to find my voice outside of the therapy rooms and the clinical conversations. And I found a home in the Department of Defense, and I found leaders who wanted to have those hard conversations and never stopped me from having incredibly difficult conversations. I think anybody who's had the pleasure of being my supervisor can tell you that if I have something to say, I'm going to say it. And if it's uncomfortable, I never feel it. And so I've really found that home in the DOD, trying to work together to try to get after these issues. And this national campaign is just everything to our efforts.
Thank you.
Well, actually, my growing up actually sounds a little bit like yours, at least. Except I grew up on a farm as a pretty anxious kid, which is interesting, and an overthinking kid, too. And so you go out there. One thing you have to do if you're an apple farmer is you have to thin the apple trees. There's too many apples on them, so you have to take some of the apples off. So if you're a pretty obsessive, anxious kid and you go out there in the orchard and you're like, well, which one do I take off? And guys, well, just kind of, that one, and, just kind of balance them out. I'm like, well, what if I take it off? It's so final. I mean, the apple's on the ground. And then you get that tree done and there's this whole row, and then there's all these other rows, and it's a very tough place to be. So I kind of migrated into, books, school, and ended up deciding to become a psychologist. And I think, that awareness that gives a psychologist, like, oh, well, that wasn't a normal way to grow up. Like my brain was doing extra stuff there. Was an insight that I think I've kind of had, just those moments where you're like, wow, I didn't know things were that way. And when I was at graduate school, which is where I met Barbara, becoming a psychologist, one of the things that I realized was when I did my master's research was nobody had ever asked people with serious mental illness what they thought about therapy. Like, there was just no record of their opinions about therapy. I'm like, well, we've been doing therapy to people for a long time. We should probably ask them. So these sort of kind of things like, why do we do it this way? And it would get me in trouble. And, I worked in the mental health system for a while in Denver and did some fun stuff there, but kept asking why and getting in more of the system level. And I think the reason I'm here today, fast forward quite a few years, was when I got to Texas. The woman whose name is in the chair, Linda Perryman-Evans, who's just left as the CEO of the Meadows Foundation, whose name we bear. About 8 years ago, when we were forming this policy, we think of ourselves as a do tank, not so much a think tank. We were talking about, my life as a therapist and what we do, and she goes, and this question came up, like, could we help everyone? And I was like, well, we can't really help everyone. She goes, well, why not? And I never thought of that before. Like, why can't we help everybody? And we kind of do that for every other disease. I mean, like, we don't say, we'd like fewer people to have diabetes. We're like, maybe we can have a few fewer people die of heart attack. We just want everyone to get better. And that insight, and that's why I love this campaign, Barbara, like when you told me about it, and you said, well, this is going to be for everyone, because we can't just go find that one person. We can't just wait till we detect the suicide risk at the point of the suicide. We have to really help that individual find their health before and help everybody. And so that's because of Linda and because of you that I'm here, I guess.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
One of the many things that I love about what you and the team have pulled together today, Barbara, is how you've been able to weave common themes that unite us personally and professionally. And one of the themes that I've heard in listening to people and talking is the theme of a personal connection to this mission and to the veteran population as well as our country as a whole. The Surgeon General's talked about a personal connection to issues of substance abuse and family. You talked about the personal connection with your father. The Secretary talked about the personal connection with his father. That's why I'm here. Your first real job in life can be very formative, and my first real job when they let me out on my own was Chief of Mental Health at a Joint Services flying training base. And I was in charge of mental health. They dropped me in and they said, good luck. And I quickly developed a close relationship with 2 Marine instructor pilots. They're both Cobra drivers. And they took really good care of me. I probably would have not made it through well without them. However, one of them died by suicide towards the end of our time at the installation. And that was an important time for me for stepping back and taking a look at all the questions and answers that I thought I knew and taking a look at them anew. That led to joining the VA and the VA mission with suicide prevention. I think you'll see across the VA, most of us have a deep personal connection to this mission and to this population, and it drives us daily.
So thank you all, and I want to, I guess, echo and riff a little bit off of, I think, those of us who, in a way, kind of eventually are able to say, hey, here's my personal connection. We're more, I think, just more aware or comfortable talking about it. But I would guess that everyone has a personal connection. We just haven't yet made it possible for everybody to acknowledge their personal connection. That doesn't mean that everyone has struggled or suffered as deeply as some of the people who die by suicide, or that they've necessarily lost someone, although I think probably most of us are not very many steps removed from somebody who has died by suicide or had a very serious. And so that's really important, because that is so much what REACH is about. If we can dial into how we all, these are human conditions we're talking about. They're not aberrant conditions, they're human conditions. They only become dysfunctional or debilitating or deadly if we don't step in. So thank you all. I did not plant those, by the way. Thank you for sharing that perspective. So why do each or any of you feel that, when we were getting ready to build this, there were detractors, not many, but people who said, oh, a public health campaign, what good is that going to do? My response was, there's never been a national conversation about suicide. Never. We've never seen that. So in and of itself, that's what's powerful about this. But from your vantage points, why do you think we need to elevate this in this way, so that it's not just those of us who can talk about these things, but really encouraging everybody to talk about these things and do things in response? Andy?
Well, I think what the Surgeon General said earlier about stigma is a huge thing. And I think one of the things that is the biggest barrier is the stigma we have in our profession. So we don't talk about this, and we are concerned. It took, and so we, for example, started looking when COVID came out at what are the mental health impacts going to be, and we did some modeling, and we released in April some projections, kind of along with what the Surgeon General was saying about there's a very good chance of increased deaths from suicide overdose because of COVID. We started talking to reviewers within the industry, and they're like, oh, well, you can't put that out publicly because that's going to upset people. You're going to drive suicide rates if you put that information out. I'm like, well, no, look at the research. The research says if we publicize details, there are absolutely some research, but I'm not aware of anybody putting out a table with numbers in it. And we have to have that conversation, and we have to have it in a responsible way. We hope those numbers are wrong. We know it's preventable. Let's put it within a readiness and prevention framework. But when we get that kind of pushback just from people within the industry, we know we have to do something differently. So I was just, you doing this, the partners doing this is just critical for helping us take a different perspective, just like you said, like we have for every other health condition we've made progress on.
No, I agree. And I also think, particularly within the DoD, we work with our military members. We're doing a lot of efforts trying to get to them, talk to them about education, support. We're working within our military force, but that is only one culture that we have to get to. If we really want to make a difference in this space, it does have to be much broader. We have a lot of subcultures we need to get to. So even within the military, we have the military culture. We also have service subcultures. We have unit subcultures. But if we're not having conversations with our children, if we're not teaching our children about these things and educating them on what risk factors are, what are protective factors, those are our future military members. So we really need to approach this from all different sides, all different subcultures. And that's why the national campaign becomes so important for us, for our efforts, One of the things that you mentioned is that they're each in other subcultures. We have subcultures around family dynamics and where you're coming from, and subcultures around where you live. The conversations we're having have to match those subcultures. The voices that we have in the Northeast are going to sound different from those that we need in the South, that are going to sound different from those we need in the Midwest. So if we're having a national campaign, we can really get at each of these subcultures and start to build that voice of support and what we need to know.
Your comment reminds me of when I was a younger psychologist before I left my practice to go into the nonprofits work. My office was in the Virginia, DC, I had 2 offices, and I remember on more than one occasion sitting with a family, a military family, and not always, but it was often the wife of the family, the mother, who would start to cry and talk about, we can't let this out. We can't let anybody know that we're here in this office. It was so painful. And and she's trying to figure out childcare, what was she going to say so that she and her husband perhaps could come in for counseling, or the family could bring their child in. I mean, the stress to try to keep it from becoming known was very much a painful barrier. And I know we see that with our veterans, Matt, still.
Yeah, I think my most straightforward answer to your question, Barbara, is there was a pretty influential piece that came out about 6 months ago, and it established all the themes that we're talking about today, that suicide prevention is a public health issue, suicide is preventable, and suicide prevention will require all of us. It said, so what's it going to take? And the answer from the researcher was collective engagement that's intentional, that pulls together values and priorities in a focused and organized way. And that's exactly what this opportunity offers us, the opportunity to pull together values and priorities under the heading of, and from the paradigm of, public health towards reaching the fact that suicide is preventable.
That's so powerful, and I love how many times we're using the word reach. Every time I was like, there it is again, there it is. So I'm going to make a programming note. We're going to go over our allotted time because I'm not going to stop us. So people who are watching, you get bonus, and we're going to use, this is going to be video captured and recorded. So this is a really important conversation. The whole program has been so rich that fortunately we have the option, unless any one of you need to get up and run out, I'm going to keep talking. Are we good? We're good, okay. So are you, and this is sort of a leading question, but I'm not an attorney, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it. Are you optimistic? Do you see things in your work or the work you've done that say, we can get there, we can dramatically shift the culture so that we move this conversation way upstream, so that people, when they're having scary thoughts of, literally thinking I might actually think about dying by jumping off that bridge or ingesting that poison, it scares them, and instead of burying it, that they actually say it to a loved one earlier. Do you feel like our nation is ready for this conversation? And if you say no, I'm still going to do what we're doing, but I want to know your thoughts. Based on what you're seeing, what do you think? Where are we?
I would say we are very much positioned for this type of campaign right now. The conversations have already been brewing. I mean, generations ago, this was not discussed. It wouldn't even be discussed as a cause of death. But we are able to start seeing the generational changes in how we're talking about this and being a little bit more open to talking about mental health, celebrities talking about mental health issues that they may be struggling with, people who are agents of change within the population that are starting to come out and speak about their own mental health challenges, or about suicide, or about sexual assault, or any of these other previously very difficult conversations no one wanted to talk about. So that gives me a great deal of hope, and I think it positions us well.
if I believed that the foundations that we were standing upon were shaky or unfounded, I would not feel confident or hopeful. But I think that the foundations that we're standing upon, there's much reason to have confidence, and in turn, much reason to be hopeful. Foundation number one, suicide is preventable. At the individual level, we know, we see this every day in the Veterans Crisis Line. It's why we come to work 24/7 and answer 1,800 phone calls a day. We receive the feedback from the veterans who are calling us saying, "You saved my life." We know that having that service saves lives. We know that 90% of individuals who attempt a suicide and survive don't go on to die by suicide. We know interventions can assist. At the population level, we have reason for optimism. I think the Surgeon General does a great job of mixing in facts with sources of optimism. There are anchors of hope within our data with suicide as well. Anchors of hope include the progress we've made on suicide rates with veterans diagnosed with a depressive disorder. It has significantly lowered since 2005 through 2017. We've made significant progress with the rate of growth in suicide for veterans within VHA care. That's a testament to the people who are working right now serving across the country in this important mission. At the population level, we know in Finland, Denmark, important progress has been made. So that foundation is sure. We just know that it's going to require a collective engagement on this. Foundation number two, it's going to require a public health approach. We know, as the Surgeon General mentioned, that suicide is an issue of clinical care for suicidal persons, but it's also an issue of suicide prevention across the population as a whole. You need both. And I think there's been times where we've been maybe segmented, and one has focused a bit more on the population, one has focused a bit more on the clinical care side. We're putting those pieces together in new ways, and I think that that's exciting and a reason for optimism. The third foundation is that it's going to require all of us. If you subscribe to Joiner's theory, where thwarted belongingness and sense of connectedness and perceived burden are important risk factors to be aware of, how can we all positively contribute to that in a person's life? We all have contributions to make with those particular variables. So to answer your question, Barbara, based on the three foundations that we're standing upon, yes, I'm optimistic.
That's great. Andy?
Well, I would just add, I also am optimistic, just to end your relief. But I wasn't optimistic all that long ago. I think it's an optimism that's really come together, because I think, Matt, what you talked about, it's a collective will. So like, I've always known folks who, could help people or who wanted to promote public health, but I think the catalytic moments that we've had over the last several years, of which I think COVID is one, the kind of common awareness we now have. So I think actually COVID, ironically, will help with this. I mean, it's going to make it worse in the short term, but I think the awareness and the catalyzing effect of that. But the collective will piece, because, our job in the, outside of government and outside of the VA and DOD structure is the 60% that Secretary Wilkie talked about who die from suicide outside of the VA system. And we see business leaders in our state, we see health systems, we see insurance companies. Insurance companies 2 years ago did not cover interventions in primary care to identify people with mental illness, depression, risk factors, opioid disorders. Now they do. Now we have to kind of catch up and get that infrastructure out there, but so many pieces have lined up, and now this public health piece, I think, gives us a framework for collective will, because at the end of the day, a lot of public health stuff, it's not rocket science. Like you talked about heart disease, my family has that too. The reason I'm less likely to die of a heart attack, which by the way was when we figured out that my grandfather had heart disease, when he had his heart attack. For me, like they've been bugging me about this for years. And so like my doctor bugs me, my wife bugs me, I bug me. I mean, getting that sort sort of awareness out there, and I think this frame, I'm a man, a white man in my 50s, I'm in one of the highest groups of risk for suicide. I mean, putting this into the consciousness and helping us all come together around this and that sort of collective will is really what makes me excited, and I think we're there.
I think we're there. And I think having the campaign stay optimistic as we move forward, because obviously, to Elisa's point, people sometimes will shy away from these conversations, just, so that's something for us to be mindful of. The last question I'd like to ask you all is, so we talked about reasons for optimism. As we go forward, what are our barriers? What do we need to make sure that we are being proactive about, that we are anticipating, that we are tackling? And some of that, I will say, I am grateful for each of you, because it's the partnerships that will help us do that. But what do you see as the big barriers that we need to make sure we stay in front of and are proactive about?
Well, I think we talk about hard conversations, how part of this work is having difficult conversations, having those hard conversations. I think sometimes the barriers go along with what Dr. Adams said about stigma. And when we talk about this, and we as a country have started to have some very good conversations about conscious and unconscious bias. And I think part of this is that. What are we bringing into the situation about our own nervousness around talking about things? What are some of the myths we're bringing into the conversations? We're asking everybody to reach out. We're asking everybody to have these conversations. And I think we also need to recognize that's hard to ask. That's hard for some people, for a lot of reasons that they may be aware of and reasons they may not be aware of, in terms of how they have been taught that mental health is reaching out for mental health is a weakness. I don't think we can expect them to just leave that at the door and move forward. But that's part of the hard conversation, and part of the hard work that we all have to do is, what are we bringing into this, and how can we start to address that for ourselves so we can help others with it?
Yeah, and I think one of the barriers too is just how devastating this condition is. I just 4 weeks ago, a child of a colleague we're working with, was one of those young people who second leading cause of death died. And I'm optimistic about the work, I'm optimistic about my partners, but every person we lose is it's devastating. And it's devastating to you, the people trying to help, it's devastating to the family. And I think one of the things we need to do is be in that devastation too. I mean, we take that for granted sometimes, but one of the most inspiring things that's happened to me in the last few years was a family who had struggled with the patriarch of that family, who had fought depression and severe suicide many, many times. They'd been saved many times across decades, but ultimately did succumb and did die from suicide. But everyone knew about his struggle. It had been shared. His wife was very upfront about it, and there were 250 of us there the next day after he died with her, just like if he died from cancer, if he died from a heart attack, because these are devastating conditions. It's devastating when it happens, but to be there to help a person fight it for as long, hopefully forever, but as long as they can, and then to be there with the family, that we got to be comfortable with that, and it's really hard, and I think we have to be candid about that.
The biggest threat I see, Barbara, is to the third pillar, which is suicide prevention, as all of us. And another parallel to what you and the team have done today, one thing I learned in the military is the importance of mission above all else. And you really needed to check yourself at the line. As a matter of fact, one of the first acts that I had to engage in officer training was crossing a blue line and stepping over. And that was symbolic of you leave you behind in your selfish, self-interest sorts of desires, and it's about the mission heretofore. I think something that we need to watch for is we're in this together, and it's going to require all of us. It's going to require all of us from an agency perspective, from a non-federal perspective, and we can't get into turf wars or battles or selfish interests. we need to stay in line together and committed to this together for that collective engagement.
Well, I wish we had even more time, because I know there's more that we could talk about, and I think this is the first of many, 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 many conversations that we will have either collectively or individually, and the work goes on. But I want to thank you each for everything you do, for your passion, for your partnership, for your willingness to get into this difficult mission. But I too feel very optimistic and hopeful, and I'm very proud of the work we're doing. I think Andy asked me how I was feeling today, and that was the word that came to mind. I feel very proud. We need to have these conversations, and by having them, we will save lives. And I want to remind everyone who's watching, please go to the website, wearewithinreach.net, take the pledge, follow us, join us, be part of this solution. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.